You really want to wake up and figure out that you're wasting half your life? And, when people do that kind of wasting, they actually hate it. And I've had lots of people come to my clinical practice who were chronic procrastinators, and so they're watching YouTube videos, say, but not ones that are good for them, although sometimes they will do that, but just browsing in that kind of mindless way that you do when you're not paying attention and you're trying to kill time. And people doing that, they feel bad, they get depressed, they feel anxious, they can't get away from it, they feel kind of quasi-addicted.
That's what they're saying about social media now. It's a huge issue with young kids.
Absolutely. But there's this feeling of kind of internal rot and corruption that goes along with it. It's like, well, you're wasting your life. It's like, so it's painful. It's painful to recognize that. Then it's painful to think, oh my God, look how undisciplined I am. I don't know anything. I can't use a schedule. I can't stick to a calendar. I don't have any aims. I don't know anything about the world, right? And maybe there's a part of me that's bitter because I haven't got everything already, and I'd just like to say, to hell with it. That's the recognition of the Jungian shadow. It's like that's what makes you vicious and untrustworthy. All of that. No one wants to look at that, and no bloody wonder. But hey, the alternative is worse. So
the problem is, you say, just saying you stop wasting your life. I think that's not enough. I think this is one of the reasons why a book like this is so important. The idea of discipline in most people's eyes is if you're not a disciplined person, it's uncomfortable, it's going to be painful, it's frustrating, you have to force yourself into these things. It's a muscle. It's a muscle that has to be developed, and these patterns have to be developed in your own mindset.
Incrementally.
Yes.
Yeah, well, so you're right, just telling people not to waste their lives is not enough, and this is another reason why I've so much enjoyed being a clinical psychologist, because clinical psychologists don't stick with high-level abstractions, especially the behaviors. They're really practical. It's like, okay, you want to get your act together. It's like, well, how about if, let's say you're not studying well, and so we do a real analysis of how much you're studying. You say, well, I go to the library 4 hours a day. It's like, yeah, okay. How much time do you actually study in the library? Well, I waste time. I have to travel there. I look at my phone. It's like, okay, well, how much? 15 minutes? Half an hour? How much is real studying? Well, maybe we figure out it's 15 minutes. Say, okay, so what you're going to do for 1 week is you're going to study for half an hour. That's all. You don't get to go to the library for 4 hours. You have to sit down. We'll figure out a time, 10 o'clock in the morning, whatever. We'll put it in your schedule. Try to study for half an hour, no more. And then just come back and let's have a conversation about how well that worked. And people will come back and they say, well, I managed it 4 days. And one day I went over and one day I couldn't do it at all. It's like, okay, that's better. Instead of 75 minutes of studying, 15 minutes a day for 7 days. What is that? 15, 70, 105 minutes. You've managed about 210 minutes. So you've already produced an improvement of 50% in your bumbling, horrible way. You got a 50% improvement in 1 week. It's like, that's deadly. It's like, so in the future authoring program, what we ask people to do is, well, think about your life along 6 dimensions. What do you want for so the goal is this: you're going to take care of yourself. You're going to have a life in 3 years that justifies its suffering. That's the goal. So you can invent the damn life, but you have to think what you would be satisfied with so you wouldn't be all bitter and resentful. It's like, okay, what do you want from your family? What do you want from your friends? How are you going to educate yourself? What do you want for your career? How are you going to use your time outside of work? How are you going to handle drugs and alcohol and other temptations like that? How are you going to keep yourself mentally and physically healthy? And these are open questions. Like, you get to answer them. The idea is you can have whatever you want, but you have to figure out what it is. It has to be realistic, and you have to figure out what it is. It's okay, so now develop a vision. What's your life going to be like in 3 to 5 years? So you write it down. Then we do something else, which is, okay, your bad habits and your resentment and your bitterness and all of that, your procrastination gets completely out of hand, and you auger down, and you're in your own personal version of hell in 3 to 5 years. What does that look like? Well, everyone knows that. It's like everyone can look into the future and think, well, if I keep going on this dark path, this is where I'll end up. Well, then you've got little hell outlined for yourself to run away from, and you got a little heaven outlined for yourself to run towards, and then you're motivated. Because sometimes, you're just hopeful. I would like a good thing to happen. It's like, yeah, but, I'd like to drink half a bottle of whiskey tonight too. It's like, so which is it going to be? Well, just being hopeful about the future might not be enough, but then you think, oh, I see, like, there's that little hell thing that I outlined that's waiting for me. And maybe I'm afraid of taking the next step forward because it's demanding and challenging. It's like, yeah, I'm afraid of that, but I'm way more afraid of where I might end up if I don't get my act together. And people should be. That's why there are conceptions of hell in so many religions. It's like, hell's a real place. Whether it's eternal, that's a whole different question. Whether it's waiting for you in the afterlife, that's a whole different question. But if you've never met anyone in hell, you haven't lived very long. You haven't had your eyes open.
Yeah, it's undeniable. That feeling of total, complete misery is undeniable. And
yeah, especially when it's compounded by the fact that you know you did it to yourself.
Yes.
That's the real fun. That's the real fun part. It's like, I'm having a bitch of a time and I richly deserve it. Jesus, that's rough, man.
This is another concept that doesn't have a voice right now. This is another, I mean, this is a giant part of being a human being. And instead of identity politics and right versus left, I think these right versus left battles, oftentimes what they are is simply the battleground for the conflicts in your own mind.
Yep. Better to have the conflict in yourself. That's another thing I really learned, well, not only from the New Testament, but a fair bit from that. You know, the idea is that, well, there's evil in the world of all sorts, and some of it's the evil in other people, and some of it's the evil in your brother's heart. But the part of it that you can really do something about, that's the malevolence in your own heart. You can actually do something about that, and that's actually way more useful than you think. So, because if you can face it in you, then you start to understand it, and that also makes you strong enough to identify it and to fight it when you see it in the external world. Plus, you don't do any harm. It's like there's lots of people all over the world going out and doing reprehensible things, and you might say, well, you should go out and protest against them. And sometimes you should, but most of the time you should think, where am I falling short of the ideal? My own ideal. Doesn't have to be one that someone puts on you. Where am I less than I should be? Where am I bitter? Where am I making the world a worse place than it has to be? Like, you ask yourself those questions, you'll be in for a big shock. Say, well, what would happen if you stopped doing that? That's what 12 Rules for Life is about. It's like, stop saying things that make you weak. Stop telling lies that you know to be lies. Stop doing things you know to be useless and counterproductive. Aim high. Adopt some responsibility. And then see what the hell happens. It's like, it'll work. And that's what I'm hoping people will do.
Yeah, I'm hoping people will do that too. And I think if more people live their life in this sort of a manner, I think we're going to have less differences in terms of our ideologies and more of an understanding that people have different ways of looking at things and different ways of living. And this combat between people, this internal strife that manifests itself in this combat between ideologies, I think you are much more inclined to let other people live their lives if you're living your life in a satisfactory manner.
That's exactly it. I have a chapter in there on raising kids. It says, don't let your kids do anything that makes you dislike them. It's like, well, that's first predicated on the observation that you're quite a monster, and it would be better for your kids if they didn't get on your bad side. And like, again, because I'm a clinical psychologist.
You keep saying monster. Why do you use that term?
Because I've watched families, like I've seen families where it's as if every single person in the family has their hands around the neck of the family member that's close to them, and they're squeezing, but only tight enough to strangle them in 20 years.
But you're not always using it as a pejorative. You've also used it, you should become a monster. You should be a monster.
Yeah, but that's you shouldn't be, it shouldn't be accidental. That's the thing.
So what do you mean by monster then, in a positive sense? Like, you should be a monster.
Oh, that's easy. A positive monster is somebody who says no and means it. Because when you say no, what you mean is, there isn't anything you can do to me that will make me agree to do this.
Why is that a monster?
Because you have to be, because no one will take you seriously otherwise. No one will take you seriously. Like, no means, if you keep pushing this, something that you do not like will happen to you. That's what no means. You don't have any strength of character unless you can put up a fight. You know, and to be able to say no to something is to be able to put up a fight. So, and you can't do that if you can be pushed around. You'll just get argued into submission, or you'll feel guilty because you're causing conflict or something like that.
But isn't there confusion using those terms as a positive and a negative? Maybe there's another word instead of monster.
Well, there is the potential. There is the potential for confusion. You say, well, is that something that can be?
Because I think a monster is a horrible thing. I don't think of it as being like a wall. Like someone who is just rock solid in their belief system and rock solid in their understanding of themselves.
Well, when you fight someone who's formidable, say, what do you think of the person that you're fighting? Like, how would you characterize them? They have a monstrous side because they can bring substantial physical force to bear on the situation and be willing to do it. So they're not naive and harmless by any stretch
Right.
of the imagination, right? They have a well-developed capacity for mayhem. And you think, well, is that monstrous? It's like, well, I would say, yes.
I would say fierce.
Fierce, fine, let's go with that.
Yeah, because someone who's fierce and formidable is not necessarily a monster. You know, just I think of a monster as being just an awful person who's done awful things and just, you know.
Okay, well, so but fair enough. Well, so back to the situation with your kids. Well, you definitely don't want to have your kids act in a way that awakens your inner monster.
Right.
Let's put it that way. And so you need to organize your family with a certain amount of discipline and a certain amount of structure so that you get to do what you want, which is back to the point that you made earlier, so that you're happy to have your kids around, so that you won't take revenge on them. And so you want to lay your life out so that it's providing you what you need to not be bitter and to work for your best interests and for the interests of everyone else. That would be lovely. And I think it's attainable. You know, because the book is very dark, and I'm a very dark guy in some ways because I've looked at the terrible things that people do to one another.
That's the fascinating way of looking at it. You think of yourself as dark? Because I don't.
Oh, well,
I
that's
don't
good.
think of you as dark.
Oh, that's good.
You're a very friendly guy. I think you're very serious, and especially about these very complicated issues. And I think that's one of the reasons why you have made this gigantic wave in online discourse and people discussing these very tumultuous times that we live in, is because you're a guy that did extrapolate. You're a guy who did look at that C-16 bill and look at Marxism and go, do you know where this is headed? And you were the guy that had the courage to say, murderous. And people are like, what the fuck is he talking about? That doesn't make any sense. And you had to spell it out and explain it. And when you do, you realize why this is so significant to you.
Yeah, well, the tribalism issue that you were
Yes.
discussing earlier doesn't seem to be all that, what would you say, debatable, that if we degenerate into tribalism, the probability of bloodshed becomes vastly enhanced. It's like, well, that always happens when people
Right.
devolve into tribalism. So, and I'm pointing to a particular kind of tribalism. I guess the darkness is that, you know, I'm very aware of the terrible things that people not only are likely to do to each other, but do to each other all the time. I mean, it's about 40% for divorce rate, right? You have to go through a fair bit of ugliness to get to divorce.
Canadians are nicer than Americans. Maybe you guys have 40%.
Maybe. I think it's
we're
pretty
like
similar.
80%.
Yeah.
I mean, I think actually it's 50% here, somewhere around that line. But yeah, you have to go through a lot. That's
And
Chris
a
Rock had a
lot
joke
that's
about
really
that.
ugly too, you know. And
Chris Rock had a joke about that. He's like 50% of people get divorced. He goes, but that's just the people who had the courage to leave. He goes, how many cowards just stay and suffer? And meanwhile,
Yeah.
he wound up getting divorced a few years later in
Right.
a horrible divorce. So,
yeah,
true story.
yeah.
It's funny, you're in my thought. No, back up. You're not in my thoughts at all.